Effective advocacy and cross-sector coalition building are crucial to inform policy from the public's perspective. So for our final panel on trends and challenges in AI governance in 2024, we're excited to welcome to the stage first our moderator, Nicolas Moës, Director of European AI Governance and incoming Executive Director of the Future Society, with panelists Keith Sonderling, Commissioner, U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Tawana Petty, Just Tech Fellow, Social Science Research Council, and Peter Schildkraut, Partner, Arnold & Porter. Off to you, Nicolas, and thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. And yeah, thank you, Keith, Tawana, and Peter for joining us and to discuss a bit the trends and challenges, right, that we are going to face next year. So this is the closing panel, of course. So like I expect this to be like the one where we make the biggest statements. No pressure. And actually, like if we want to start on cue there, like I think Tawana, I would have a first question for you, right? With regards to civil society. So AI companies have disproportionate influence on the regulatory decision-making, right? Civil society has been and is being sidelined of many of the AI regulatory decision-making processes, be it on this side of the Atlantic or the other side of the Atlantic, and everywhere also at the global level. It's quite of an issue. If they are not given or granted a seat at the table, how can civil society groups actually make their voice heard? Like, what approaches to advocacy do you think can be effective, and what can we do to improve the situation?
Thank you for that question. Well, first and foremost, I always believe in the power of the people. So whether or not a seat is given at the table or not for civil society organizations, which I have to add, should not be conflated with directly impacted or marginalized communities, right? I kind of wish we'd go back to saying NGOs. That way we would know that not all civil society organizations are representative of directly impacted and marginalized communities. But I would say that Dr. King said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And so I think we've seen a lot of examples already of authors, union workers, artists, and I think we're going to see educators get into this field of resistance the more that they're coerced into using like generative AI systems. And so, yes, I would say that although these spaces are marginalizing civil society and directly impacted communities, that they're going to organize outside of these spaces because they've always organized outside of these spaces.
I see. So like there's a certain level of organization that is needed for this. And actually one of the parallels that we can draw, right, Keith, when we speak of civil society, like the EEOC has been set up in the context of a very strong like civil rights movement. And today we are also starting to talk about an AI agency of some sort that would also be in charge of like checking a bit what these AI systems are doing, maybe auditing or that kind of thing. What are the parallels between the EEOC's establishment and the current discussions about an AI agency?
Yeah, that's a really great question. But I do want to just make a comment of what you said and how important this is and sort of the theme of the advocacy and being involved in this equation. And I'm really thankful to the Athens Society for doing this here in the U.S. this year, and for all of you to be here today and engage in this important conversation. Because if you think about my agency, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission was created after Martin Luther King marched here in Washington, D.C., which led to the Civil Rights Acts, which deals with some of the most fundamental civil rights here in the U.S., which is to engage in the workforce to be able to provide for your family without being discriminated against. And, you know, since our agency was created in the 1960s, our stakeholders, a very Washington, D.C. term since we're here, have really been, you know, two groups: employers and employees and unions, right? And that's our world, and that's how we've known. But now technology is coming into the equation, very much in the workforce, and we'll talk about AI being used in human resources and ChatGPT displacing workers. So we have new stakeholders that we need to bring into this equation that may not be familiar with these other agencies. So when it comes to technology, when it comes to artificial intelligence, who are those new stakeholders that we need their inputs? Number one, it's the people who are going to be investing in creating these tools, who may not know about some of these civil rights laws and may not speak our language. And then more importantly, the entrepreneurs and the people actually with the ideas who are creating these products, creating the algorithms, who may not also know about our world. So, you talk about the value of input across the board. It's so critical for everyone to be in this new ecosystem. For whatever agency you're dealing with, whatever use you're dealing with, there's just new players involved in this. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants to invest in technology that's going to discriminate. Nobody's going to want to build technology that's going to discriminate. But a lot of these laws are very complicated and need that discussion to see what those longstanding guardrails are. Now I'll answer your question, but I wanted to get that point across. Our agency has been enforcing employment decisions since the 1960s. That's what we know, that's what we do. And we are investigators, we see the results of employment decisions, and we see if there's bias in there, and if a decision was made lawfully or unlawfully. And now that technology is coming into the equation, and essentially algorithms and complex data sets are making those decisions, we could really get lost in trying to regulate technology. And without additional funding from Congress or more of training, we're not going to be able to do that. So it's really important when we talk about potentially new agencies, which Congress can certainly do, and to give the government that skills, to give our agency that skills of how to regulate the actual technology. But for the time being, right now, as we speak, whether it's AI making an employment decision or a human making an employment decision, we have to look at it in the same way. And we're always going to regulate and look at the outcomes, whether or not we have the skills or sophistication to regulate the technology. And we can't lose sight of that, even though there's not an AI agency yet. For our purposes, that doesn't matter right now because we regulate the results employers make.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, we have talked about civil society and NGOs and the regulatory agencies, it's like the executive branch as well right now. But Peter, what will be the role of the judiciary in shaping the trajectory of AI in 2024 and perhaps beyond?
Well, thank you, Nicolas. And thank you also to the Future Society for having me here. And pleased to say how delighted that Arnold and Porter is to be sponsoring the Athens Roundtable now for the third year. But you're right, Nicolas, to note the importance of the judiciary in shaping AI governance policy in 2024 and beyond. Now, as a preface, and with apologies to the international audience, I can only speak to U.S. courts. But that said, I do worry about how all the focus in the press and the conversations like this on legislation and regulation may take away attention from the litigation risks that companies that are developing or deploying AI systems have today under existing laws, as Keith was just alluding to about all the new stakeholders that confront the agencies that are enforcing those existing laws. So thank you for the advertisement on the need for outside lawyers. But in the United States, much enforcement of, and indeed definition of, rights comes from the judiciary. And that would happen in cases like Husky versus State Farm Fire and Casualty, which is a putative class action alleging a Fair Housing Act violation from subjecting insurance claims from black homeowners to greater scrutiny than those from white homeowners due to automated claims processing and various types of artificial intelligence used to screen claims. That case is pending in the Northern District of Illinois, having survived a motion to dismiss, which for the non-lawyers here means that it's going to be heading into discovery. It wasn't just thrown out on purely legal grounds. Another case, Mobley versus Workday Inc., is another putative class action against the enterprise software provider, Workday, under various employment discrimination statutes. This case alleges algorithmic bias against African Americans who are over 40 and have a disability, and resulting in their not having been employed by employers using Workday's software. That case is pending in the Northern District of California. A case that was filed earlier this month, Estate of Locken versus United Healthcare Group in the District of Minnesota, is a putative class action involving the use of an algorithm in Medicare Advantage health insurance plans. And here it's particularly interesting because the claims are rooted in the common law primarily, contract, quasi-contract, insurance, bad faith, as well as a Wisconsin statute. But the claims involve that the allegation that the algorithm was inaccurate and the insurer relied on it anyway. So now we're actually going to be having courts dealing with the fact that AI systems work probabilistically, which means sometimes they make incorrect decisions just inherently, and now they're going to be adjudicating inaccuracy based on claims such as that. I can go on. There are cases involving automated vehicles. There are cases involving intellectual property that are pending before the courts. And as the courts resolve these and other cases, we're going to have greater clarity on how our existing laws do and do not address harms from artificial intelligence development and deployment. And legislators will have greater clarity on the gaps that they're going to need to fill.
I see. Yeah, that's interesting, and actually that brings us back then to the people affected by these technologies, right? And therefore, like Tawana, I'm actually curious to hear from you. This civil society and this group of NGOs, of course, there is a role for them, right? And yet there are divides, divides that we have witnessed at the policy-making level, but also in general on social media, right? It is very clear that not all NGOs agree with each other, which is maybe a healthy thing. But this division only seems to confuse policymakers and benefits the AI companies that kind of use this sense of incoherence, let's say, from the civil society voices as a way to kind of claim that that civil society do not know what they are doing. Most of the recommendations overlap. Sorry?
I said no bias here.
No bias here, absolutely not. No, apologies for that. I'm a neutral moderator on this case, but most recommendations from civil society that I've looked at, they overlap. There is a sense of stronger controls, scrutiny over and accountability over these players. So these fragmentations amongst the voices that advocate for these stronger controls, how can we resolve it, or how can we make the best of it, perhaps, in a way that is more effective to in our advocacy?
No pressure, right? Well, I think homogeneity has gotten us into this issue in the first place. And so I think that the pressure to make civil society orgs, NGOs, become some sort of monolith is a dangerous precedent. We're premature in heightening the contradictions of artificial intelligence, right? Some folks don't believe that artificial general intelligence is on the horizon. Other folks don't know the difference between artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence. A lot of folks are dealing with automated systems and think that's artificial intelligence. And then you have a situation where, as I indicated earlier, civil society orgs are not necessarily representing those who are most impacted or harmed by algorithmic systems. And so I'm from Detroit, Michigan, where 50% of the known cases in the United States for misidentification cases for facial recognition come out of my city. And a lot of times we're not at the table. And so I think the push, and at the risk of ostracizing myself, I think another push for like trustworthiness is premature as well, right? We haven't dealt with responsibility. We haven't dealt with consent. We haven't dealt with the right of refusal. We're still learning what a human alternative could be, right? And so although we have these, blueprints, which I champion and appreciate, and the executive order, which I champion and appreciate, there's so many voices from that dialogue still missing. And so I think it's very premature to ask for homogeneity between all these organizations that don't represent. So there's so many people who are left out. And then finally, I'll say there's another example I think about, right? If I'm looking at the executive order, it talks about best practices with regard to predictive policing, where there's so much research to say that predictive policing shouldn't exist. And there are so many people who have been harmed and impacted by predictive policing. So I don't know that a person who's impacted by that system would ever agree that we could come to a point where there's a best practice for that particular system. And so, yeah, I think it's a premature conversation, and I don't think that we should be pushed to all agree while we're still defining terms and figuring out what these systems actually are.
I see. That's okay. That's then therefore like maybe like trying to find how to make sure that like in diversity we still manage to pack a certain political punch as well, and be able to kind of offset the influence from the private sector and on these discussions, I suppose. That actually brings me, sorry, Keith, to the questions of, you mentioned Tawana, the executive order, and Keith, I'd be curious to see like what else, in addition to the executive order, are you seeing from at the state level, the White House, the rest of the world, that we can learn from?
And again, I just want to double down on what you said here. I know you asked me a question and I'm just agreeing with what you're saying. I don't mean to be the moderator, but this is really important because you keep raising really great points. You do too, but I want to respond to yours.
Hey, I know who's important on this panel.
Talking about the diversity of comments, this is where it's really important. And think about my agency. Individuals are going to be impacted different based on different technology. So if you think about facial recognition in a video interview, there's the MIT Gender Shades Project, which shows dark-skinned females are less likely to be seen on video than white-skinned males. So that's a stakeholder group we need to hear from as we regulate that specific use of the technology. Using natural language processing for an interview on an app for applying for a job that's going to record your voice. That's going to impact people with foreign accents more than people who speak fluent English. That's going to impact people with disabilities more than people without a disability. So that diversity of thought, not just from the broader trade groups saying here are our big picture issues, it has to be that granular for us to be able to regulate, give guidance, and then do law enforcement on the back end of that. So speaking to, now I'll finally answer your question again. Okay, yeah. You can leave, we're good.
As long as he agrees with me.
Yeah, right. So, I think looking to 2024 on the regulatory side, I want to take a step back and say, being at a civil law enforcement agency, having to enforce laws, having to enforce the uses of all this technology right now, we can't, in the executive branch, get distracted with what the Congress is going to be doing, with what the EU is going to be doing, what state and local governments are going to be doing, because that would give the false sense of impression that we don't have laws to enforce and that we don't have a job to do right now related to those issues. And until Congress gives us more authority at the EEOC or the FTC, we just have to do what we know best. But that being said, I think there's a lot you can look at with a lot of the proposals, since last year, New York's Local Law 144 regulating employment decisions using AI in New York City. There's a California proposal that last year, 331, that was going to come back next year. And then, of course, the EU's AI Act that has the employment systems in the higher risk category. And if you look at the common thread throughout a lot of these proposals, these are things that employers who want to use these tools can be doing right now. And what are we seeing those common threads are? Pre-deployment testing, yearly testing as the models changes, testing as the inputs changes, consent for employees using these systems, disclosures of the audits of how they're being used. I've been arguing all that can be done voluntarily right now by employers who want to use this tool. There is for any risk associated with that, at least you can see it on the front end. You can do testing before you ever make a decision on someone's livelihood to ensure that these tools are being used as promised and not discriminating on. So I've really been looking at a lot of those and saying, well, there's a lot of good of these proposals that although at the EEOC we can't mandate you do a pre-deployment audit, we can't mandate that you give employees consent before they have to use these tools. We can't mandate the disclosures of what your audits are. State and local governments are doing that. But if you're doing that now voluntarily, you can prevent discrimination from happening. You can lower your risk of using these tools, because if the EEOC comes and investigates you, if you're one employer, say you're two employers, both of them bought the same tool. Both of these tools in my space promise diversity, equity, inclusion, promise removing all bias, promise moving, getting you the best employees. And one employer actually spends the time, money, and builds the governance around it, does pre-deployment testing, see it's impacting a certain group improperly, changes either the model to have a more diverse slate or changes the inputs of the skills to make sure it's not discriminating against a certain group. And does that and documents it, and it prevents discrimination from happening, versus another company who just took the vendor's sales pitch saying, this is all you need, let it go. It's like any other SaaS software. You're going to have all these promises by using it. Who's going to be in a better position when we come to investigate bias? The company that's saying, look, we did everything we could before we ever used this tool. And we changed the model. We worked with the vendor, versus, I don't know, they told us this is going to be perfect, and we took their sales pitch. So all this can be done right now without being forced to have this done through federal governments, through state and local governments, for foreign governments. And that's what I've been advocating for right now. So I think going into 2024, as more and more states and local governments and foreign governments propose the same thing, start doing that now.
Okay, thank you for that. That's something that we are aware of some of the challenges that are coming up. These are like some important ones. Peter, perhaps do you have a view on what are the biggest regulatory compliance and risk management challenges that companies will have to deal with in 2024?
Sure, Nicolas. They're really twofold. I mean, one is an internal one, organizational structure. Do you have an existing compliance structure that can deal with AI systems? Do you need to adapt it? Do you need to invent something from whole cloth because you don't have something that's going to fit very well? Are the right people involved in this system, both from expertise, different domains of professional backgrounds and subject matter within the company, and the right life experiences? That I can promise you that Keith, Tawana, and I are all going to have different perspectives and see different things. And you want all three of us on that committee taking a look as to whether a system is going to work or not work, because we offer different perspectives. And you want to, just based on our life experiences, let alone our different professional backgrounds. And do you have the right authorities in the room? Are they sufficiently empowered within the company to make the decisions and keep the bad models off the production floor, or to change the models, change the data, as Keith was just talking about? And picking up also on what Keith was saying, that I think the second big thing, or big challenge for 2024 is an external one. And that is the uncertainty over the exact requirements that you're going to be facing legally as various laws are being proposed, various regulations are being proposed, there are amendments coming online. Different jurisdictions have this or that. And while so much is changing so fast, I think that what companies can be doing right now, as Keith was saying, is focusing on managing the risks. Don't manage don't wait for legal requirements and manage the legal requirements. Manage the risks now, and you'll be in good shape, whatever the legal requirements are. You may have to do some tweaking if they say that you've got to do A instead of A prime, but fundamentally you'll be in the right place. And then for multinational businesses, I think I would just add that the potentially differing requirements across jurisdictions is going to be a problem. I mean, well, it's not necessarily a problem, but it creates a choice. On the one hand, you can choose to comply with the most prescriptive requirements, not necessarily the strongest requirements, but the most prescriptive ones. Or you can avoid the markets with requirements that you can't meet. And one of the things that I actually worry about with respect to what our friends across the pond are doing in Brussels right now is that it's going to actually dampen the competitiveness of European companies. This is a point that on a panel that I did 2 years ago, moderated here 2 years ago, called Harmony or Dissonance, that Sebastian Wieczorek of SAP was pointing out that he was worrying about having to compete against non-EU companies that didn't have to comply with all the rigors of EU law as they were training up models. And then not necessarily for deployment in Europe, but for deployment in the rest of the world, where the Brussels effect may not have fully reached. And so European exporters are going to be having issues potentially that companies from outside the EU will not.
All right. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think like we're gonna have time to have the Q&A, so let's see whether like people want to talk more about that. I just want to prompt already people to think of questions if they have any. Meanwhile, already one for the three of you then. If there is one thing for us to course correct or to make sure that we get right in 2024 for the good governance of artificial intelligence, what would it be? Like just off the top of your mind, in 20, 30 seconds each, would you be able to do that?
No, not in that amount of time. But I think, look, a year ago when we were in Brussels, we wouldn't really be discussing ChatGPT and generative AI like we are now. So I think as government agencies, we were just dealing with the traditional, now old school machine learning, and now here's generative AI, and there's significant issues where I could spend an hour on how generative AI is going to impact the workplace and displace jobs and augment jobs, and it's happening so fast where we have to just continue to keep up with the technology as it's coming out, and who knows what the new technology is going to be this time next year that we don't even know about right now. And like I started, it's just going back to basics. And what is the technology doing? Ultimately, it's going to be making some sort of decision and impacting livelihoods in some way. And whatever agency has jurisdiction over that, whether it's a housing decision, a finance decision, an employment decision, there's long-standing principles, agencies, and law enforcement related to that have to just continue to make sure that everyone knows that we're going to be looking at the results regardless of how you got there.
I'll say that I think we've outsourced intelligence prematurely. That's my favorite word today, prematurely. But in that regard, I'm really appreciative of the NIST AI risk management framework, and specifically the way it breaks down the different types of biases. I think we're getting pretty clear on computational and statistical biases, right? But the human cognitive biases, we still have a lot of work to do as human beings, right, to deal with those biases that then translate into algorithms and different systems. And so I'd like to see us drill down and spend a little bit more time doing some of that reflective work. And I think that we can start to address some of the discrimination that's happening within institutions, organizations, and computational systems. Yeah.
What they said. No, not that I disagree with anything that either Keith or Tawana just said. I think that it's going to be important for folks to seize the momentum that's been going on, that has been built over the past year with generative AI's flourishing, and to push forward and develop the structures, both governmentally and within within companies and other organizations outside of government to ensure that we've got the best governance of AI systems that we can put together.
All right. Yeah, thank you for that. So I think, yeah, thanks very much already. Let's see whether there is further questions from the audience. I will also look whether online we have a few questions coming up. And yes, let's start first with live audience. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for this insightful panel. So I'm very concerned about the impacts on AI, especially on traditional silence voices and populations that are unheard, such as indigenous communities, traditional communities. I've been working since 2010 with those communities and now have researched on the impacts of AI on unheard voices. So I would like to hear from the panel, how do you advise civil society to more effectively inform policy and law? And of course, civil society organizations are different, but should they get together to back those important issues, or what are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
And maybe another question from online, from Babita Ramlal. How do you envision the AI Safety Agency would perform oversight and audits? So maybe we can bring these two questions to the AI Safety Agency, so US AI Safety Institute, I suppose.
Yes, but with respect to what I didn't hear?
Would perform oversight and audits
okay.
over the thing. But first, perhaps a question from sorry, what was your name? Luciana, thank you.
Yeah, I'll just say that, yes, they need to come together. And I think there needs to be an analysis of who's missing from the table and then actively pursue those missing voices from the table. The problem is that a lot of us are being watched, but a lot of us aren't being seen. And so I think once we realize that these populations are not, or their voices are not included in the dialogue, it is incumbent upon any organization, institution, or government to actively pursue that community to ensure that, number one, they want the system to exist in the first place, and number two, what harms have been created from those systems, and to offer up an opportunity to revoke or refuse that system and go to the drawing board if that's necessary. And I think so we have a lot of work to do in that regard, but I think that it starts with conversation and deepening the questions, because sometimes the questions are more important than the answers, and I don't think we're asking enough questions.
Peter, maybe you want to?
Sure. On the second question, the one that I had problems hearing.
Or whichever question.
No. I mean, I think that I can certainly address that one. The big thing is that we need to really develop the capacity of the algorithmic and auditing ecosystem. And that fits in with one of the major emphases of the executive order, which was building capacity both inside the U.S. government and across society. Auditing right now is in its infancy. People don't really know what an algorithmic audit is, or everybody has a different definition of it. Auditing typically is against a set of standards. We don't have those standards. So it becomes, we need to start from the basics and build that infrastructure up, and we need to do it quickly.
I see. I mean, on that front, we discussed in the standardization, if we do not have the standard, or if you cannot audit what you are deploying, maybe we should not deploy it in the first place. That's one of the questions that we should probably be asking as well. Keith, do you want the closing words on this?
I do think, to this point too, it's just without this global standard of what an AI audit is, we again have to look to the long-standing principles of each agency. And there's long-standing employment audit testing when it comes to employment assessments that was created in 1978 called the Uniform Guidelines and Employment Selection Procedure, which you use for audit assessments that were done on pen and paper. And now the technology is really democratizing a lot of these employment assessments that you could do them on your phone and your app. Those principles, called the 4/5 rule, now needs to be implemented related to these algorithmic data sets as well. So again, in the meantime, without this, one golden standard, we have to look at each use's longstanding principles that exist already.
I'm actually going to jump in. I mean, I think even when we do have that gold standard, we're going to need to address each of these longstanding rules and the ones that do apply now and will continue to apply in the future.
Yeah, I think we can continue this conversation probably for a long time, and I think thank you very much for this conversation. Now we should continue this conversation and see probably next year edition where have we made progress on this, and I think we should be held accountable actually by the audience of whether or not we have progress on this. Thank you so much. We have a lot of work to do, as you have said, a lot of questions to ask and a lot of answers to find. So really appreciate you coming up on stage today to talk with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.